Hello and welcome to the Faith Seeking Understanding podcast. We are currently, in a broad sense, looking at Old Testament wisdom. I was going to say literature, not literature, the wisdom in the Old Testament. And specifically, since last episode, we've been looking at Proverbs 1 to 9. So in the last episode, we looked at how wisdom and the fear of the Lord, which we've discussed in the earlier episodes, relate in Proverbs 1 to 9. And we kind of you proposed a model for thinking about what did you say? You said wisdom, fear of the Lord is like the first fruits of wisdom.
Right. Yeah. The fear of the Lord is the first fruits of wisdom. It's what wisdom, which is associated quite closely with the instruction of the parents and the Torah that Yahweh gave to his people, particularly in a book like Deuteronomy, is being called to mind. And it's as the reader pays attention to Torah that they will see that will bear fruit, which is the fear of the Lord.
Fear of the Lord. Okay. So what are we doing in
keeping his commandments?
This episode. So we're still in 1 to 9.
Right. We're still in 1 to 9. In that first Proverbs episode, we effectively looked at Proverbs 2, verses 1 to 11. We saw how that mapped onto the rest of what Proverbs 1 to 9 has to say on wisdom and the fear of the Lord. But we also spoke about how Proverbs 2 offers us something of a table of contents for this first section of the book. And we saw how in verses 1 to 4, if you listen to instruction, then verses 5 to 11, then you will fear the Lord and keep his commands.
Yep.
It'll fashion in you the sort of character that God wants to see in his covenant people.
You'll be upright, righteous, just, those sorts of things.
Yeah. Which we see map onto different sections of the section of this first collection in Proverbs. So this idea of paying attention to instruction, of paying attention to wisdom, of the fear of the Lord we see elsewhere. At the beginning of each instruction, there's this injunction to pay attention. We saw this idea of wisdom and the fear of the Lord in the book's motto, and 1 verse 7, 9 verse 10. It's sort of peppered throughout as well in a couple of other places. But it maps onto these other parts of the collection. What we're doing in this episode is moving into the second half of the table of contents.
That's where you spoke about avoiding the bandit, avoiding the adulteress.
We'll come to that.
The foreign woman, you said.
Yeah.
And saying living long in the land.
Right.
Right.
So this is what we can expect. If we become the sort of covenant people that God is expecting, then these are the sorts of things that we can see play out. In particular, if you pay attention to God's word, God's Torah in Deuteronomy, becoming the sort of people that he expects, then you will be able to avoid these particular evils that are happening on the ground in the post-exilic period.
The post-exilic period.
Post-exilic period. So when Proverbs 1 to 9 was written, was most likely after God's people had returned from exile.
Okay. So how then do we make sense of the fact that it says it's written by Solomon?
Good question. So when it says at the beginning of the book, these are the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. It's a title that's given to, firstly, a title that's given to the book as a whole.
Okay.
So when we talk about Proverbs, just the genre of Proverbs, not the book Proverbs,
Yeah.
it's the sort of thing that we were talking about in the previous episode where a rolling stone gathers no moss, or a person's heart plans their way, but it's the Lord who establishes their steps. It's these sort of quips that the book has been known for. That's generally what we think of when we think of a proverb.
Okay.
So what is very likely going on here is that as the book is coming together, as the different sections of the book are being brought together as a unified whole. And remember, from the previous episode, we saw that these are, the book is made of different sections that the book tells us were written at different times. We've got the Proverbs
also written by different people. Yeah.
Yeah, well, Proverbs of Solomon, and then the Proverbs of Solomon collected by the men of Hezekiah.
Yeah.
Those are two different time periods.
Yeah, very
in
late.
history.
Yeah, Hezekiah is much later, isn't he? Yeah.
And that's not even taking into account Agur or Lemuel, who very well might have been fatherless And some of their words are sort of being brought in, whether they were fictional characters or actual people. We can talk about maybe in a following episode if it's interesting enough. But the book tells us that it's written at different time periods. So probably what happened is that as it was being brought together, that heading was put on top of the book as a whole. It prepares us for what it's got to say and is in line with what it's got to say in Proverbs 1 to 9, preparing us for the perspective we should have as we read the rest of the book. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that first collection was actually written by Solomon.
Right. It's sort of like a preface, right, to the Proverbs, which like is normal for, we say like this book is written by author X, but then the preface is written by another author.
Yeah.
And that's fine. Like that's not okay.
The second is that having so much to say, it calls to mind what we said in another previous episode, that it makes sense that a book that has a lot to say about wisdom would call to mind wisdom's archetype.
Yeah.
The key figure of Israelite wisdom attached to the top of this book lends it a level of credibility that it might not otherwise have.
Gotcha.
Which, thirdly, might make us think of other books that were definitely not written by Solomon, like The Wisdom of Solomon, which was written in Greek.
Solomon knew Greek. Come on. Yeah.
It was written. This was written in the intertestamental period. So this idea of books being attributed to famous people, we'll see it in a slightly different sense in Ecclesiastes, but books being attributed to famous people because it calls to mind a narrative, it calls to mind a perspective that the author wants to bring about in its readers, or call to mind for its readers. It's not an uncommon thing. It's not an unheard of thing. So it's not so far-fetched that something like this would happen for a book like Proverbs. All of this makes it possible for us to see that Proverbs 1 to 9 wasn't written by Solomon. But fourthly, the reason that I think it probably wasn't written by Solomon is that this collection seems to map quite nicely onto the sorts of circumstances that we see in the post-exilic period, and less so what we see in Solomon's day.
Yeah, stuff that would have been happening around Solomon's time. Okay.
Which we'll see play out as we think about the two main sets of characters that we see in this part of Proverbs, the evil men and the foreign woman.
Okay, that makes sense. So are we just going to go through them? Like, is that the idea?
Well, let's start with the evil men. Let's just kind of take each group to begin with.
Okay.
And let's start with the evil men. So do you want to read for us Proverbs 1, 10 to 19? Or 8 to 19.
Okay. Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and forsake not your mother's teaching, for they are a graceful garland for your head, and pendants for your neck. My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. If they say, come, let us lie in wait for blood, let us ambush the innocent without reason. Like Sheol, let us swallow them alive and whole, like those who go down to the pit. We shall find all precious goods. We shall fill our houses with plunder. Throw in your lot among us. We will have one purse. My son, do not walk with them. Do not walk in the way with them. Hold back your foot from their paths, for their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed blood. For in vain is a net spread in the sight of any bird. But these men lie in wait for their own blood. They set an ambush for their own lives. Such are the ways of everyone who is greedy for unjust gain. It takes away the life of its possessors.
All right, so what's going on there?
Well,
just on the plain reading.
Yeah, I mean, he's describing a bunch of people, like a bad crowd, that they have this apparently enticing thing, like get rich quick by stealing from others, basically. Get rich quick scheme. And he's basically saying, like, don't throw your lot in with them. Don't go with them, because even though there may be this initial, despite the temptation, the enticement of it, they're ultimately going to be, they're going to, I guess, reap the benefits of their life, right? They lie in wait for their own blood. Is this phrase that he's just going to say. This idea in verse 17, it's in vain a net is spread in the sight of any bird. I guess what they're saying is that these guys are even dumber than a bird.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, they know what their life is going to lead to, And even a bird would know not to go that way, but yet they go that way anyway.
Yeah.
Okay.
And in fact, they're doing it to themselves.
Yeah.
They're spreading a net for themselves.
Right.
In a sense.
Oh, they're spreading it for themselves, yeah. And like, okay. And the idea there is like you would have a net, you wouldn't just have the net. You would have something that's in the net that would be enticing to the bird. But the bird's like, I'm not an idiot. Come on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so the bird's like, listen, I'm not going to fall for that. But the very next verse, these men lie in wait for their own blood.
Yeah.
They ambush only themselves.
Yeah, they set an ambush for their own lives. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but just straight off the bat, it's this over-the-top, frankly, quite crazy scheme of, come on, we're going to lie in wait for these people for no reason.
Yeah.
We're going to ambush them. We're going to drag them down to Sheol. Like, it's this, take them down to the place of the dead. We're going to swallow them alive like a pet. Like, honestly. It sort of gets me wondering, like, would the son be so stupid as to actually listen to them? I think it's worth bearing in mind that what we're dealing with in Proverbs 1-9 is poetry.
Mm-hmm.
It's elaborate poetry. It's over the top. It's vivid in its imagery, but it's poetry that is intended to persuade. So Crystal Meyer, the way that she's put it is that their function is not to aesthetically please, but to argue and convince. And so it's giving this elaborate portrait of what these people are really like and painting them in such a way like, obviously I wouldn't go with them because the author of Proverbs wants you to not go with them.
Mm-hmm.
And when they see how that maps onto their real circumstances, hopefully when they see that, they think that, and so they don't go after it.
I mean, this is a common thing. I mean, so, we say, you think about Adam and Eve in the garden with the fruit, right? Like, there's two perspectives on it. There's two, perspectives, I guess, on what Eve does, right? So, in the broader sense, it's like, oh, well, she disobeys the commandment of God. Okay, so don't do that. That's not a good idea, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas from her perspective, though, she's like, oh, well, it's good for being wise and it's good to eat and be wise, right?
Yeah.
And that's the motivation that the Bible says that was motivating her. And I mean, I often raise this to people when we talk about this. It's like, as a Christian, you never like want to go after something because it's against God's will, right? I mean, obviously that's not what you're going to do.
Yeah.
But like, there will be other good things about it. And you need to be able to like take a step back and reflect about it. I mean, and they're even identifying some of the good things themselves, right? Oh, we'll have one purse, we'll make lots of money, we'll spread it equally among ourselves, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And yet, so you're kind of almost seeing both perspectives from this. You're like shifting from the outside to the inside language, and
Yeah, I mean, there's a sense in which we can actually be quite charitable to these thugs.
Yeah.
Be like, well, I mean, is it such a bad thing to pursue money? The way they're going about it is questionable,
right.
But like, they're wanting wealth, and actually elsewhere in Proverbs it does promise that, well, it does kind of portray wealth as this worthwhile thing to have.
Yeah.
What are they guilty of, though? It is worth just kind of zoning in on that. What is it that... So obviously they're kind of surface level things that we can pinpoint.
Okay.
It's wrong to ambush somebody. Please don't do that.
Yeah.
Don't swallow them alive, please.
Yeah.
But when it gets to the end,
It actually unjust gain.
Yeah, it tells us what's wrong.
Yeah.
Ill-gotten gain, unjust gain, those who extort for extortion or something like that. Botzea batza is the Hebrew. That I think that word something to the effect of extortion.
Okay.
Or the like. These are social realities that are being picked up on. People who are taking advantage of others, not unlike, I would think, what we see in Nehemiah. So Nehemiah 5. Now the men and their wives raised a great outcry against their fellow Jews. Some were saying, we and our sons and daughters are numerous. In order for us to eat and stay alive, we must get grain. Others were saying, we're mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our homes to get grain during the famine. Still others were saying, we have had to borrow money to pay the king's tax on our vineyards and fields. Although we are of the same flesh and blood as our fellow Jews, and though our children as good as theirs, yet we have to subject our sons and daughters to slavery. Some of our daughters have already been enslaved, but we're powerless. because our fields and our vineyards belong to others. And so we've got this picture here of...
But the implication here is that Nehemiah is a post-exilic. We're in the post-exilic era now.
No, that's worth picking up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, so the scene that you're describing here is something where they've come back from their exile, and they're like almost creating like a feudalism. Like some of the Jews are like extorting the others.
It seems like it, yeah. So what we should bear in mind is that when Nehemiah, we've got several waves of people who return from Babylon, now Persia, to Jerusalem, to Judea, but they were still under foreign rule. They were still under Persian rule.
Right.
Persia still had control over the region, whereas Babylon sort of took the elite of society and said, well, come back to our capital and work for us. And they treated them fairly well, but they took advantage of the highly skilled in society to build up their own empire. What the Persians sort of did was to say, no, you can go home and you can go resettle in your lands, and you can repopulate and rebuild your temples and reconstitute your religion, and just pay us taxes.
Okay.
And don't try and revolt against us. So what we've got here is a sense where they're in their own land, but they're not sovereign over their own land.
Right.
They're still subject to Persian tax, and as you've got things like famine, as you've got these outward pressures from the surrounding nations that we can also read about in Ezra and Nehemiah, putting pressure on them to do this or do that, or to join coalitions or what have you, there's a sense in which they're actually under financial strain, political strain, and you've got some within the community who are taking advantage of the situation and extorting from
it's kind of like what
Jews.
So that's a similar situation to what you get in the New Testament, right? Like where you have the Romans over, and then you have the tax collectors and things like that. It's sort of a similar vibe.
Yeah, I think it was perhaps a little bit more institutionalized in the New Testament, although I say that with a bit of caution. I'm not really sure. There were differences about the particularities of that, but yes, same sort of dynamics. They're not out of their own rule, but you've got locals who are just taking advantage of the situation for their own gain, or the way Proverbs 1 puts it, ill-gotten gain, extorting.
Okay, so these aren't necessarily bandits.
No.
I think that's one of the implications here, right? This is just, they're using the image of a bandit to describe the behavior of what could have been bandits on the side of the road, but it could go all the way up to like your white collar crime, like any sort of extortion for ill-gotten gain, regardless of how you're leveraging the systems or things like that. Okay.
And I think that makes a little bit more sense to the rhetoric. I mean, if we were literally talking about a group of bandits, is the sun really that tempted to go after people who are literally saying we're going to ambush somebody for no reason?
We're going to go kill someone and get their money. Yeah.
But if that's a caricature, if that's when you see extortion, think of these bad guys. Would you go after them? Obviously not. So don't do this either. That seems to be the argument.
Okay.
Again, what we saw from the previous episode, how do you avoid that? Listen, my son, to your father's instruction. Don't forsake your mother's teaching. They are a garland to grace your head and a chain to adorn your neck. Pay attention to that, then you'll have the wherewithal to be like, no, I'm not going after you guys.
Is the motivation in this warning to not go with these people because it goes against God and the parents' instruction? Or is it don't go with these people because their life is going to be brought to ruin through this way of living? Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Okay, both. Okay, cool. So as I was asking it, I was like, he's going to say both.
But I think because they go hand in hand. Yeah. That there is this idea that, and you can see this peppered through the book of Proverbs, but elsewhere as well, like in Deuteronomy, that if you're the sort of people, we spoke in the previous episode about how right at the end of Proverbs 2, if you become the covenant people that you're expected to be, you can expect to remain in the land. If you don't, then you're going to be uprooted from it. That's the last resort that God sort of puts in place in Deuteronomy. There are a whole lot of other consequences that come first of famine, of this or that, of your enemies will chase you and you'll be running away from a leaf. You'll be so scared or whatever it is. So this idea of the kind of threat of death, the threat of ill fortune coming upon you, and it sort of goes hand in hand. That it's a sign that God's angry with you. Not in a simplistic sense. We can't just kind of put a 1-to-1 ratio on it and be like, if you're suffering, then I think other parts of even other parts of Proverbs sort of call that sort of thinking into question. But that sort of covenant dynamic, that sort of correlation does seem to be there.
Okay.
In places like Deuteronomy, in places like Proverbs as well.
Okay.
So
makes sense.
Yeah, they sort of go hand in hand.
All right.
That's the first set of people that we meet.
Yes.
These evil men, these extorters. The second group is, the second character is
The adulteress.
the foreign woman.
Okay.
Right, so most of our English translations have the adulteress, the wayward woman. It's also interesting that our English translations aren't always consistent. So sometimes it's one way, sometimes they put it the other way around, the adulteress and foreign woman, the adulteress and the wayward woman. Or
my 2 verse 16 says, "So you will be delivered from the forbidden woman, from the adulteress with her smooth words."
Right, so the NIV has, what was that? ESV.
ESV, yeah.
NIV has, wisdom will save you also from the adulterous woman, from the wayward woman.
No way.
With seductive words.
Oh, wow, okay.
I mean...
How could that... Okay. I mean, I get... Yeah, okay.
Okay, so...
So why do you take issue with this? Break it down for us.
There are two main words that are being used here in Proverbs 1-9 to talk about this woman. The first is the Hebrew word nochria.
Okay.
From the word nochri, foreigner, is the word that is usually translated elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible.
Okay.
Fairly straightforwardly. Across the board, when it talks about a person, it just means foreign.
Okay.
The other word is zara. So in Proverbs 2, Isha zara.
Which is that? 2 verse 1?
2 verse 16 again.
Okay.
To save you from Isha zara, from Nochria, smooth with her words. Zara is a little bit more ambiguous than Nochri, where Nochri almost always means ethnically foreign, and when it doesn't, it's because it's talking about something that's not a person. Zara is a little bit more ambiguous in that it could just talk about strangeness more generally.
Okay.
But when it does appear, then context can tell you what.
Right.
Context will specify what this word means.
Right. So if I were to fix the translation, then it would say 2 verse 16 would read, "So you will be delivered from the strange woman, from the foreign woman with her smooth words."
Right. And because strange is a little bit more ambiguous.
Yeah, the foreign is
what gives it context, gives it definition. So the strange woman, i.e., the foreign woman, smooth with her words.
Is there any sense in what? I mean, like, why have they gone with adulteress? That's like quite different from. It has different implications than foreign woman.
Yeah. Well, I think it's because of Proverbs 6. So if we look at Proverbs 6:20 onwards, we looked at the beginning of this instruction in the previous episode, where there's this injunction to pay attention to the parents' commands and their Torah, keeping you from your neighbor's wife.
Wait, sorry, which was
this? Is verse 24 now.
Okay, 6 verse 24.
If you pay attention to all this, then that'll keep you from your neighbor's wife. Now, that is less ambiguous. That is just straight up talking about your neighbor's wife. And keeping you from the foreigner, from the tongue of the foreigner, or the smooth talk of the foreigner.
Wait, okay, wow, mine says to preserve you from the evil woman, from the smooth tongue of the adulteress.
No, you're actually right. It is evil woman. It is evil woman.
Okay.
I misread that.
Okay. I was like, wow, they really...
Okay, so the confusion comes in with the spelling of the word in Hebrew. So It's the word ra, which looks like that in Hebrew. If you can't read Hebrew, you can see that the characters are the same in both cases.
Okay.
But the word is ra, which means evil.
Okay.
Which would look like this.
Oh yeah, for those unfamiliar with Hebrew, the letters that you see written are all consonants.
Yeah.
And sometimes silent letters that are a bit weird. And then the vowels are like added around the consonants as extra things. So they're technically like optional. And you could get away without them. And that we did for a long time, right? Like so you can have the same consonants there and add in different vowels to get a different word.
Yeah.
Which you can intuitively think of in terms of English. Like take a word and remove the vowels, and then you can add in different vowels, right? Like road and read and another read, like those can give you different words. Yeah.
And context will sort of help you to see, if we were to take out the vowels and like, okay, well, I'm not going to cross the read.
Yes, right, yeah.
Similar sort of thing going on in Hebrew.
Okay, so the one way to add the vowels in.
If we go with ra, with an a vowel at the bottom, that means evil.
Evil, okay.
But that's, if with the same consonants, we could also put re-a, which is neighbor.
Ah.
Now, the reason that's probably not neighbor is because everywhere else in Proverbs, that word for neighbor comes with a pronoun. Like
your neighbor.
Fixed onto it, yeah. So usually it's with a second person pronoun just attached onto the word.
Okay.
As a suffix.
Got you.
So that's where the confusion comes in. But it probably is evil. Just ra. So from the keeping you from, or to guard you from the evil one, from the smooth talk of the foreign one.
Okay.
As this encounter develops, though, we can see, okay, what we've got in view here is actually a case of adultery.
Okay.
Later on actually specifies this is adultery. And then right at the end there, for jealousy arouses a husband's fury. You'll show no mercy when he takes revenge. He won't accept bribes, what have you.
Oh, I see that in verse 29, it says, so is he who goes into his neighbor's wife.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that would be, that's a pretty clear case of...
So in chapter 6, it's unambiguous that we do have a case of adultery going on. But that doesn't mean she can't also be foreign. That doesn't mean that we can just redefine the words.
Yeah, right.
What I think is going on is that we have a passage like chapter 6 where it's talking about adultery. It mentions that she is a foreigner, but foreign is then taken in a more metaphorical sense of estranged or foreign to the value system of the covenant people or some such.
Okay. That's quite a stretch, but okay.
Well, I think it's a stretch too.
Yeah.
The more straightforward reading, I think, is just to see plain and simple, this is a foreigner. Two things I think should be said. The one, just as a caveat, is the problem with the foreign woman is not foreignness per se.
I was going to say, we should probably clarify this, yeah.
Foreignness is not necessarily the issue.
Yeah.
I think we can see this from plenty of other places in the Old Testament. We can look at Ruth.
Yeah.
Ruth was a foreigner.
Yeah.
We can look at Rahab.
Rahab, I was going to say.
She was a foreigner.
Yeah.
We can look at Isaiah, the later parts of Isaiah, which were also written in the Persian period, which say that the foreigner who keeps my Sabbaths, like, don't tell them to push off. They can be part of it. They can be part of this people.
Yeah. They
can be included. The details of that might need some spelling out, but the facts of the matter is they're not just cast out and said, you're a problem. Foreignness itself is not the issue. And what Proverbs 1:9 is picking up on in calling to mind this foreigner is not just any old foreigner. I think the way that she's depicted, it's calling to mind, secondly, the foreign wives debate of that we see in places like Ezra and Nehemiah, that we see in Malachi 2, I think.
Again, those are the post-exilic documents and era that we're dealing with it.
And what we have there is this worry that the Jewish men of the community were intermarrying with foreigners from foreign women from the surrounding regions who would then bring in their foreign gods, water down the ethnic identity of the community, and threaten to lead them down the road to apostasy.
Which we saw with Solomon.
Nehemiah calls Solomon to mind.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
He says, look at what happened to Solomon. Can we please not do this?
Yeah.
You people can only speak half Hebrew. Like, what's your issue? He's looking around and seeing this watering down of their covenant identity and sees that as a concern. And Proverbs 1-9 picks it up and says, so don't go down that road.
Yeah.
Don't follow down that road.
Yeah, so that can be connected to foreignness because God's people is situated within a nation, right? I mean, and that nation can have foreign people come in which case they're no longer foreign in the sense that's relevant.
Sure.
Which is they're no longer serving these other gods.
Yeah.
And you could actually technically be a sojourner, a foreigner in the land, but if you worship Yahweh, you're not a foreigner in the sense that's concerned here. It's the foreigner who takes you and entices you to go after other gods rather than obey the Shema. The Lord our God is one. Like, He's the one who we need to get the nation. We need to be a light to the nations for, rather than mudding with these other gods. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's 100% the concern. And so what we have again in Proverbs 5-7 is this concern that by intermarrying or by letting in the foreigner in a sense, that it's going to water down covenant identity, that it's going to lead you away with the result that Proverbs 2 will be rooted out of that.
I think we're seeing here and I think these two examples are giving us a taste, or these two characters are giving us a taste of the difficulty, I guess, of wisdom, right? Mm-hmm. Like in the last episode, we spoke about how its wisdom is like based in instruction, based in listening to those who know better, God and your parents who came before you and so on, and not going just after your heart.
Yeah.
Now, I think we could say, oh yeah, in some cases that's pretty obvious. Like, don't drink yourself mindless because that's going to be a pretty unpleasant thing. Or like, don't waste all your money at the casino because that's a dumb idea, right? Mm-hmm. But here we're talking about, oh, well, I'm in a bad situation and this person's offering me a way to like better my financial situation in a pretty quick way, and like I need to do that. We need to get food on the table. I need to help my family, all right? Or like there's this woman that is really beautiful, or switching it. There's this guy that's really beautiful from another nation or whatever, and like I love them and they love me, and all they want is the good for me, and things like this. And they're saying no. Here we're saying like no. I mean, yes, we can understand what you're saying. Like your heart wants those things, but like ultimately those are going to be worse for you. Like they're going to go contrary to God. They're going to poison your relationship with God and His people, and so wisdom involves like being able to like stem those passions as well, even though those are perfectly understandable. I mean, that's what we sing about 99% of the time in our songs these days, right? Yeah. So that's quite a difficult picture we're painting now of, even though they get painted in like very obviously bad language. Yeah. Like if you can see that it's perfectly natural to want these things. It's perfectly natural for these to be the things that the father speaking in Proverbs needs to like kind of warn you about, right?
No, absolutely.
That's tough. That's really tough.
There's one more thing that I want to point out to do with these characters, but before that, there probably is one more passage that we need to do business with, just on this idea of her foreignness.
Okay.
The other passage that we might go to, okay, chapter 6 is probably the most obvious. That literally says adultery. Mm-hmm. But the other is that there's a bit of a contrast that's drawn between the foreign woman and your own wife in Proverbs 5.
Oh, okay.
Well, at least that's what it looks like. Proverbs 5 begins in a similar sort of way to what we've seen. Pay attention to wisdom.
Yep.
So that you will be able to avoid the foreign woman. It just launches straight into, for the lips of the foreign woman drip honey, her speech is smoother than oil. There's this seductiveness about her,
yeah.
But in the end she's bitter as gall and sharp as a double-edged sword. Her feet go down to death, and it's this like, it might be sweet in the moment, but it's going to lead you to death, man.
Yeah.
And the advice that he gives instead is drink water from your own cistern, running from your own well. Should your springs overflow into the streets, your streams of water in public spaces, let them be yours alone, never to be shared with strangers. May your fountain be blessed. May you rejoice in the wife of your youth. A loving doe, graceful deer, and goes on to kind of talk about rather be happy with your own life.
Mm-hmm.
If that's the contrast, then again, we can sort of see how somebody might be inclined to think, okay, well, maybe it's adultery that's in view here. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe we should understand foreignness in this more kind of loose sense.
Oh, I see. Okay. But this could just be in a context with multiple wives or a thing, right?
Yeah, very possibly. The other thing, though, is that if we look at what's emphasized here, drink water from your own cistern, running water from your own well. Should your springs overflow into the streets so that it's outside?
Yeah.
There's this in-out language that's going on here.
Okay.
So rather stay in, don't kind of spread outside.
Yes. So they could be inside your marriage, but it could also just be inside the people.
Could be inside the community. Yeah.
But then why does it say rejoice in the wife of your youth?
Well, stay married to your Jewish wife. Don't stay married to the woman that you fell in love with within the community.
Okay. Yeah.
Part of your own covenant people. Don't start looking outside.
Okay.
Stay inside.
Gotcha. So it's not necessarily. There's plenty of ways to read this that don't imply necessarily adultery. I mean, adultery could be one of the ways this could happen, but you could divorce your wife and marry a foreign wife or something, or you could just take on a second wife, or you could take on a concubine or something like that, given the time in which this was happening. Okay.
And look at the warnings earlier in that same passage. Now, my sons, listen to me. Don't turn aside from what I say. Keep your path far from her, lest you lose your honor to others and your dignity to one who's cruel, lest strangers feast on your wealth and your toil enrich the house of another, lest foreigners feast on your wealth. At the end of life, you'll groan and you'll find yourself in trouble with everybody, and it's just not going to go well for you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But notice there, verse 10, that foreigners are going to have this claim over you.
Yeah.
Because of this intermingling.
Yeah, that makes sense. So okay, so this is just another underscoring the point that this justification that might be given for translating the word as adulteress doesn't hold. Okay, got you.
So if we can bring it home, coming back to the table of contents in Proverbs 2, if you pay attention to instruction such that you become the sort of person that fears God and keeps his commandments, that will help you to spot what's wrong with these evil men and to avoid their schemes. It'll sort of give you the wherewithal to know that that's not the covenant ideal. That's not what God's people should be mixing with. And to avoid the foreign woman that as beautiful as she looks, as smooth as her speech is, not to go down that road because of the dangers that might lie on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
And doing all that, then you'll remain in the land.
Which they've just come back to in the post-exilic context, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Please don't stuff this up again.
How do we not go back into exile?
Yeah. It's worth underscoring there, in the way that in Proverbs 2, the way that the foreign women and the evil men are described, it uses a lot of the same sort of language. They both abandon something that they shouldn't.
Okay.
It talks about both of their paths and their ways.
Yeah.
It talks about both of their speech.
Yeah.
The way that they're both introduced is in the same way, so as to save you from, or to protect you from this character or that character.
They're both associated with death and Sheol and things, yeah.
Elsewhere in Proverbs 1-9, both stories end with the trapping of birds.
Okay.
So at the end of Proverbs 7, it talks about, let's just go there. With persuasive words, Proverbs 7:21. With persuasive words, she led him astray. She seduced him with her smooth talk. All at once he followed her like an ox going to the slaughter, like a deer stepping into a noose, till an arrow pierces his liver like a bird darting into a snare. And with the trapping of birds, like we saw in chapter 1.
Yeah.
Does any bird go into a net?
Yeah.
Both lead to death. So there's this blurry line between these characters that there are distinct dangers that are being avoided in each case, and distinct ways that these characters map onto the historical context. But also these blurry lines between them to say that these are the sorts of dangers, these are the sorts of things that you'll encounter, these are the sort of voices that will be vying for your attention, pulling you in to listen. What we'll see in the next episode is that there's another voice, though, one that we haven't come across yet.
Okay.
Which is woman wisdom.
Okay.
Now, there are a whole lot of questions about who woman wisdom is, but we'll save that for later.
Right, okay. Cool. Well, okay, so we're going to end it there. Cool. So thanks for joining us in this second episode in Proverbs. I hope it was informative. Well, I hope it was informative to you as it was to me. Again, if you're watching on YouTube, click the subscribe button and the bell icon. If you want to listen to us on different podcast platforms, we're available on Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts. So you can welcome to listen to us there as well. Otherwise, thanks for joining. We'll see you in the next one.